When Vladimir Lenin seized power in Russia in 1917, he created the world's first socialist state. But other socialists said that Lenin's dictatorship wasn't true socialism at all. Over the next 60 years, people who called themselves socialists, often disagreeing violently with each other, would rise to power in scores of countries all over the globe, until they ruled more than 60% of humanity.
I have seen the future, and it works. Those were the words of American journalist Lincoln Steffens after visiting the Soviet Union in 1919. Even though the Bolshevik Revolution frightened people around the world, for many it seemed to validate Karl Marx's prophecy that socialism's triumph was inevitable. Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Welcome to the second episode of Heaven on Earth, a think tank special. In this hour, the communist revolution spreads to China. Democratic socialism comes to Europe, and socialism emerges as a new path to economic growth in the third world. But as socialism in its many forms continues to spread, it brings with it disappointment and despair. Nowhere does the reality live up to the ideal. And so we begin in the new Soviet Union, that is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Vladimir Lenin died of a brain hemorrhage in January 1924. He was only 53 years old. But in his relatively short life, he had laid out a path to power for revolutionaries around the world.
What Lenin did electrified, excited, inspired, terrified different people all over the world, depending on their frame of mind. And one of the more curious things it did was it gave birth to fascism. Lenin had showed that you could take Marxist doctrine and sort of twist it all around. And there was Mussolini in Italy, and he says he too is a revolutionary. For him, like for Lenin, making the revolution is the main thing. And he says, well, if we could throw out the proletariat and put in the vanguard of the proletariat, maybe we could throw out the proletariat and put in the nation instead. And all over Europe, there were groups of socialists who suddenly became nationalists. One, but not the only one, who did was Hitler, who comes along and has this new ideology of national socialism, which retains a lot of socialist principles, but adds on the implacable hatred of the Jews.
Benito Mussolini joined forces with Adolf Hitler to launch a world war even more devastating than the last. The alliance between Italy, Germany, and Imperial Japan placed Mussolini in bloody opposition to his old socialist comrades. In the end, the grandiose ambitions of fascism went up in smoke. The world last glimpsed Mussolini's body strung up at an abandoned gas station in Milan. The very next day, Hitler shot himself. With the defeat of the Axis powers, the ideology of fascism collapsed. But the death of this strange offshoot only cleared the way for other branches of socialism to flourish. In the aftermath of World War II, communism spread like never before. The Soviet Union's military gains in World War II set stage for communist governments to take power in Eastern Europe and North Korea. But communism's biggest post-war conquest was yet to come. 4 years after the war's end, insurgent communist forces in China drove the pro-Western nationalist government off the mainland. In January 1949, the communists marched into Beijing to declare the birth of the People's Republic of China. Their leader was a 55-year-old intellectual named Mao Zedong.
Mao was a true revolutionary. He did not believe in normalcy. He did not believe in routine. He disliked bureaucracy. What he did was to mobilize millions of peasants to join the communist revolution.
Mao gave the Chinese people what came to be called the Iron Rice Bowl, a promise of lifelong economic security. But the price was submission. The party would soon control everything. The books people read, the clothes they wore, even whom they married, and how many children they had.
Mao felt that one has to really not wait for changes in the social system at all, but change human beings just as they are at once. That means to educate them and cut them off from all previous culture. Lenin allowed his people to read the classics and had access to the old literature. And Mao cut it all off, and for a while all they could read is inanities in the so-called Red Book. So he had this idea that if you do that, you completely cut them off from the past and create new human beings that way.
For nearly a decade, China followed the Soviet model of nationalized industry and collectivized agriculture. But the results were disappointing, and Mao grew impatient.
He became disillusioned with the Soviet model, and he thought he could improve upon it and bring communism overnight. He was truly a utopian thinker. And so that is when, in the late 1957, he launched what has been come to be called the Great Leap Forward.
At the core of the Great Leap Forward was a new Chinese institution, the People's Communes, more than 23,000 of them, comprising more than 500 million people. By mobilizing the country's vast labor pool, Mao believed his experiment would catapult China ahead of the West in both agriculture and industry. But the country's frenzied commitment to the Great Leap Forward led only to impossibly high production quotas and inferior products. In one program, the government tried to speed up steel production by encouraging peasants to build backyard steel mills on communes across China. For raw materials, the peasants donated iron goods from their own homes, including woks and other cooking utensils. The steel produced was worthless.
Mao also emphasized on agriculture production. One way he thought speeding up the agriculture growth was to plant it more densely, and that's scientifically irrational, and that did not really increase the production. Very soon, in 1959, there was also some drought, flood, sort of natural disaster, plus this human policy, and that became a killer combo.
The peasants were forced to work long hours every day. They were totally exhausted by this. They weren't getting enough food to eat. They were literally, in some areas, starving. And it is estimated that this utopian idea led to the death of 30 to 40 million Chinese peasants.
A century earlier, Karl Marx had dreamt of the final stage of socialism, a society of complete human fulfillment, where a person might hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and write poetry in the evening. He called it Communism. In Russia and China, the word had come to mean something very different.